7 years after a fleeting affair overseas, a married billionaire CEO gets a phone call from a foreign number that turns his whole world upside down. At the end of the line, a little boy says hesitantly, "Hi sir, I think you might be my dad." Jeffrey Wolf leaned back in the leather chair of his corner office, the panoramic view of the city twinkling behind him. Another late night. His schedule was a ceaseless parade of meetings, phone calls, and decisions, leaving little room for reflection or connection. He glanced at his phone, which buzzed relentlessly with notifications. One from Emma caught his eye. "Don't forget about dinner tomorrow. It's important," he sighed. Important, yes, but important had become a flexible term in their marriage. Their conversations had grown clipped, their once intimate partnership now reduced to logistics and pleasantries. Emma had been a steadfast pillar during his meteoric rise to wealth and power, but lately, they felt like strangers sharing a house too big for their dwindling affection. Jeffrey shook off the thought, focusing instead on the spreadsheet in front of him. Hours passed. The city outside his window had gone to sleep, but Jeffrey was still working when his phone vibrated on the desk. He ignored it at first, thinking it was another spam call, but the number caught his attention. It wasn't local, or even domestic. A foreign number, one he didn't recognize. Curiosity tugged at him. He picked up the phone, hesitated for a moment, and then answered. "Hello?" A pause. Then a small, nervous voice spoke on the other end, breaking the silence. "Hi, sir. I think you might be my dad." Jeffrey froze. The words didn't register at first, as if his mind was trying to protect him from their implications. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice sharper than he intended. The voice, a boy's voice, came again, more hesitant this time. "My name's Luca. My mom told me about you. She said you might be my father." Jeffrey's heart raced. This had to be a joke. Or a mistake. He gripped the phone tighter, struggling to find the right response. "Listen, I don't know what this is about, but I think you have the wrong person." "I don't think so," the boy said quickly. "My mom said your name is Jeffrey Wolf. She showed me your picture." Jeffrey's stomach dropped. This wasn't a prank. Whoever this boy was, he knew enough to make his claim unsettlingly plausible. A memory surfaced, unbidden and vivid. 7 years ago. Florence. A business trip that had started like any other but had veered into uncharted territory when he met Isabella. She was a painter, her hands smudged with color, her smile disarming. They'd spent one unforgettable week together before parting ways. He hadn't thought of her in years, or so he told himself. He cleared his throat, trying to summon his usual composure. "Luca, where is your mother?" "She's here. In Florence. She doesn't know I called. Please don't be mad at her." Florence. The word hit him like a physical blow. He stood up, pacing the length of his office, the phone pressed to his ear. "Luca, this is a lot to take in. I don't know what you're expecting from me, but I need time to figure this out." "Okay," the boy said softly. "I just wanted you to know. I've been waiting a long time to call." The line went dead. Jeffrey stared at his phone, the silence in the room now deafening. He set it down on his desk, but his hands were trembling. He couldn't ignore the truth gnawing at the edges of his mind. The timing was right. The location was right. And the boy's voice, it had carried something familiar, an echo of himself as a child. But no. It couldn't be. This wasn't his life. Jeffrey Wolf was a man of control, of plans and outcomes, not someone who let his past sneak up on him like this. And yet, he couldn't stop the memories from flooding back. The way Isabella had looked at him, her laugh like music in the small cafe where they'd spent hours talking. The way she made him feel, alive, unburdened, like the version of himself he'd always wanted to be. He shook his head, trying to dispel the images. This was absurd. People like him didn't have long-lost children calling out of the blue. But as he stared at his phone, now silent and unassuming on the desk, he knew there was only one way to get answers. He'd have to find out the truth. Jeffrey ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. Emma. What would she think if she knew? He already felt the weight of her judgment, her disappointment. Their marriage had been strained for years, but this could break it. He looked at his reflection in the darkened window, the face staring back at him both familiar and foreign. Who was he now? A billionaire, yes. A husband, nominally. But a father? He couldn't wrap his mind around it. And yet, a tiny voice inside him whispered that it might not be as impossible as it seemed. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he pushed it aside for now. There were more questions than answers, and the only way forward was to face them head-on. Jeffrey didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling of his darkened bedroom, the soft hum of the city outside doing little to quiet his racing mind. The call replayed in his head, each word etched in sharp detail. "Hi, sir. I think you might be my dad." The voice was too real, too sincere to dismiss as a hoax. Beside him, Emma shifted in her sleep. He glanced at her, the faint glow of the bedside clock illuminating her peaceful face. She deserved better than his secrets, yet here he was, holding one that could shatter everything. By morning, Jeffrey was no closer to clarity. At breakfast, he sat across from Emma, who was scrolling through her phone. The silence between them felt heavier than usual. "You're quiet," she said, not looking up. "Just tired," he replied, reaching for his coffee. Emma's eyes finally met his, and she frowned. "You've been tired a lot lately. Is something going on at work?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "Nothing I can't handle." Her frown deepened, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned her attention back to her phone, the moments slipping away. Jeffrey felt a pang of guilt but pushed it down. He wasn't ready to share this, not yet. Later that day, as he sat in his office, the memories began to surface unbidden. 7 years ago, a business trip to Florence had been an unexpected escape from his carefully controlled life. He hadn't planned to meet anyone, let alone someone like Isabella. She was unlike anyone he'd known. Vibrant, impulsive, and endlessly curious, Isabella had drawn him in with her warmth. She had shown him a side of himself he rarely let out, the man who laughed freely, who wandered cobblestone streets without a schedule, who shared his dreams without fear of judgment. They'd spent a week together, each day more intoxicating than the last. She'd taken him to her favorite spots, the quiet cafe with the best espresso, the art gallery tucked away from the tourist crowds, the bridge where the sunset painted the Arno in gold and pink hues. He could still picture her there, her hair catching the light, her smile soft yet mischievous. "You should stay longer," she teased on their last evening together. "Florence hasn't finished with you yet." He'd smiled, knowing he couldn't. "I wish I could." The goodbye had been bittersweet but firm. Jeffrey had returned to his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, while Isabella had stayed in hers, a memory he tucked away and rarely revisited. Until now. The buzzing of his phone jolted him from his reverie. His chest tightened as he saw the same foreign number on the screen. For a moment, he considered letting it ring out, but something inside him urged him to answer. "Hello? Hi, it's me again. Luca." The boy's voice was cautious, but there was a determined edge to it this time. Jeffrey swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "Luca, I'm not sure what to say. Just listen, please." The boy's plea was soft but urgent. "I know this is a lot for you. It's a lot for me too. I've never met you, but my mom talks about you sometimes. She says you were kind to her. She doesn't know I'm calling you, but I just wanted to know if you'd want to talk to me." Jeffrey leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. The weight of Luca's words was crushing. This wasn't a scam or a misunderstanding. This was a child, his child, reaching out. I need time to figure this out," Jeffrey said, his voice unsteady. "I don't know how to handle this." "Okay," Luca said, his tone tinged with disappointment. "But I'll call again, okay? I just wanted you to know who I am." The line went dead, leaving Jeffrey staring at his phone once more. He felt hollow, his mind a swirl of emotions, guilt, doubt, fear, That evening, Emma noticed his distraction. They were seated in the living room, her eyes flicking to him over the rim of her wineglass. "You've been somewhere else all day," she said. "What's going on?" Jeffrey hesitated. The urge to tell her was strong, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words. Instead, he shook his head. "Work stuff. Just a lot on my plate right now." Emma studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're lying to me, Jeffrey." His chest tightened. "I'm not lying." "Yes, you are," she said quietly, setting her glass down. "I know you. Something's going on, and you're shutting me out again." The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Jeffrey opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Emma sighed and stood, leaving the room without another word. Alone, Jeffrey rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He couldn't keep this to himself forever, but the thought of telling Emma terrified him. Their marriage was already fragile, and this could be the final blow. As he sat there, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a photo from the private investigator he'd hired to look into Luca's claims. The image showed a boy with dark hair and striking features. Jeffrey's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was undeniable. Luca wasn't just a voice on the other end of the line. He was real. A part of Jeffrey's past that had suddenly become his present. Jeffrey leaned back, staring at the photo. He'd always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to control outcomes. But this was different. This wasn't just a problem to solve. It was a life, one he might have changed forever without even knowing. And for the first time in years, Jeffrey felt truly lost. Jeffrey couldn't take his eyes off the photo. The boy's face stared back at him, youthful and full of life, yet there was something unmistakably familiar in his expression. The investigator's report was thorough, names, dates, and locations that aligned perfectly with Jeffrey's fleeting affair in Florence. Luca was almost certainly his son. He spent hours that night pacing his study, the photo clutched in his hand. The magnitude of the revelation was overwhelming. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He couldn't pretend it wasn't real. But how could he face Emma with this? Their marriage was already strained, this could shatter it entirely. Yet the weight of the secret was suffocating. Jeffrey knew he had no choice. The next morning, Jeffrey found Emma in the kitchen, sipping her coffee as sunlight filtered through the windows. She looked up when he entered, her expression guarded. The tension between them had been palpable since their argument the night before. "Emma," he began, his voice quieter than he intended. "We need to talk." She set her mug down slowly, her eyes narrowing. "About what?" He hesitated, his throat dry. "There's something I need to tell you. It's not easy." Emma crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Go on." Jeffrey took a deep breath, the words catching in his throat before finally spilling out. 7 years ago, on a business trip to Florence, I had an affair." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma's face froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You what?" "I'm not proud of it," Jeffrey said, his voice shaking. "It was brief. A week. I never thought I'd hear about it again. But I got a call. From a boy. He says he's my son." Emma stared at him, her expression a mix of shock, anger, and hurt. "A son? You're telling me you have a child with someone else?" "I don't know for sure," Jeffrey said quickly. "But I hired someone to look into it. The evidence is compelling." Her laughter was bitter and hollow. "You've been keeping this from me? Hiring investigators while I've been here clueless? Do you have any idea what this feels like, Jeffrey? I didn't know how to tell you," he admitted. "I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," Emma snapped. "You've succeeded in doing exactly that." Jeffrey reached for her, but she stepped back, her eyes flashing with fury. "Don't. Just don't." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, suffocating. Finally, Emma took a deep breath, her voice calmer but no less strained. "What are you going to do?" I need to go to Italy, Jeffrey said, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. I need to meet him. To figure out the truth. Emma shook her head, her expression unreadable. And what about us? What happens to us while you're off chasing the past? I don't know, Jeffrey admitted, his voice breaking. But I can't ignore this, Emma. I have to face it. She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Go then. Do what you have to do. But don't expect me to be waiting with open arms when you get back. Jeffrey's heart ached at her words, but he knew he couldn't argue. He had made his choices, and now he had to face their consequences. The flight to Florence felt endless. Jeffrey spent the hours alternating between anxiety and guilt, replaying his conversation with Emma and imagining what awaited him in Italy. The idea of meeting Luca both terrified and intrigued him. What kind of boy was he? What would he think of Jeffrey? And Isabella, what would she say after all these years? When the plane landed, Jeffrey's chest tightened. The city was as beautiful as he remembered, its timeless charm untouched by the years. But this time, he wasn't here for pleasure or business. He was here to face his past. Jeffrey checked into a small, discreet hotel and spent the first few hours acclimating. His phone buzzed with messages from work and a single terse one from Emma. Let me know how it goes. He wanted to reply, to say something that would ease the tension, but words failed him. As evening fell, Jeffrey dialed the number he now recognized all too well. It rang only once before a young, eager voice answered. Hello? Luca, Jeffrey said, his voice soft. It's me. It's Jeffrey. There was a brief silence, and then Luca's voice brightened. You called. Are you here? Yes, Jeffrey said. I'm in Florence. I'd like to meet you. And your mom, if that's okay. Okay, Luca said, his excitement palpable. I'll tell her. She'll be surprised, but I think she'll be happy. Where should we meet? They arranged to meet the next day at a small cafe near Isabella's home. As Jeffrey hung up, his heart pounded. Tomorrow, he would see her again. Tomorrow, he would meet the boy who might be his son. That night, sleep eluded him. The city outside buzzed with life, but Jeffrey felt isolated, trapped in his thoughts. He thought of Emma and the life they built together, now hanging by a thread. He thought of Isabella, wondering if she had ever imagined this moment. And most of all, he thought of Luca, a boy who had no idea how much he had already changed Jeffrey's world. Morning came too quickly. Jeffrey dressed carefully, his nerves mounting with each passing minute. When he arrived at the cafe, Luca was already there, sitting at a table with a bright smile. Beside him sat Isabella, her expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. Jeffrey froze. 7 years had softened her features but hadn't diminished her beauty. He stood at the cafe's entrance, his heart pounding as he watched Luca animatedly speak to Isabella. The boy's hands moved expressively, his energy infectious even from a distance. Isabella sat across from him, her expression soft and attentive. She hadn't changed much, her auburn hair framed her face in loose waves, and her calm, steady presence seemed just as he remembered. Jeffrey hesitated, wondering if he had the right to walk into this moment, this life that had gone on without him. But then Luca looked up and saw him. His face lit up with a smile that sent a strange, unexpected warmth through Jeffrey's chest. Jeffrey! Luca called out, waving him over. Isabella turned, her eyes meeting Jeffrey's. For a second, the years fell away, and they were back in Florence, sharing laughter over glasses of wine. But reality rushed back, heavier now. She stood as Jeffrey approached, her expression unreadable. Hello, Isabella, Jeffrey said, his voice strained. Jeffrey. She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried the weight of years unspoken. It's been a long time. It has, he agreed, unsure what else to say. Luca tugged at Jeffrey's sleeve, breaking the tension. I saved you a seat, he said eagerly, pointing to the chair beside him. Jeffrey hesitated then smiled. Thanks, Luca. He sat, feeling the boy's curious gaze on him. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Luca had Jeffrey's dark hair and sharp features, but his eyes were Isabella's, warm and full of life. It was unsettling and comforting all at once, a mirror of a life Jeffrey had never imagined. "So," Luca began, his voice bright. "Do you like chess?" The question caught Jeffrey off guard. "I do, actually. I used to play a lot when I was younger." "Cool. I love chess. I'm pretty good at it too," Luca said proudly. "Maybe we can play sometime?" Jeffrey smiled, the boy's enthusiasm easing some of his nervousness. "I'd like that." Isabella watched the exchange quietly, her expression softening. "Luca's been very excited to meet you," she said gently. "He's been asking about you for years." Jeffrey turned to her, guilt creeping in. "I'm sorry you had to go through this alone. I didn't know." "I know," Isabella said, her voice calm but firm. "That's why I didn't reach out. I didn't want to complicate your life if you weren't ready for this. I've always told Luca the truth, but I also told him you might not be ready to meet him." Luca looked between them, frowning slightly. "You don't look like you don't want to meet me," he said to Jeffrey, his voice filled with childlike honesty. Jeffrey's chest tightened. "Luca, I'm sorry it took me so long to come here. But I'm here now, and I'd like to get to know you." The boy grinned, his earlier doubt melting away. "Great! Can we play chess tomorrow?" Isabella laughed softly. "Luca, give Jeffrey some time to settle in." "No, it's fine," Jeffrey said quickly, surprising himself. "I'd love to play tomorrow." Luca beamed, his joy lighting up the moment. Jeffrey couldn't help but smile back, the guarded walls around his heart beginning to crack. Later, as Luca dashed ahead to a nearby gelato stand, Jeffrey and Isabella walked slowly behind him. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. "You did an incredible job raising him," Jeffrey said finally. "He's amazing." Isabella smiled faintly. "Thank you. He's everything to me." They walked in silence for a moment before Isabella spoke again. "Jeffrey, I need to know something." "Why now? Why did you answer that call?" Jeffrey hesitated. "At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a mistake or a prank. But when I heard him, I couldn't ignore it. I had to know if it was true." "And now that you know?" she asked, her voice tinged with vulnerability. Jeffrey met her gaze. "I don't know what the future looks like, but I want to be here for him. For both of you, if you'll let me." Isabella studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We'll figure it out." The next morning, Jeffrey arrived at Isabella's home, a charming apartment filled with vibrant artwork and the faint smell of paint. Luca was already setting up a chessboard on the coffee table, his excitement palpable. "Ready to lose?" Luca teased as Jeffrey sat down across from him. "Confident, aren't you?" Jeffrey replied with a smirk. "Let's see if you can back it up." The game began, and Jeffrey quickly realized Luca wasn't bluffing. The boy was sharp, his moves calculated and deliberate. As they played, they laughed and talked, the conversation flowing easily. "You're not bad," Luca admitted after a particularly close game. "But I'm still the champ." Jeffrey chuckled. "I'll get you next time." As the days passed, Jeffrey spent more time with Luca, each interaction peeling back another layer of his guarded heart. They discovered shared quirks and a mutual sense of humor, often laughing until Isabella came to see what the commotion was about. It was surreal but wonderful, a bond forming where none had existed before. One evening, as Luca worked on a drawing at the kitchen table, Jeffrey and Isabella sat nearby, sipping wine. The silence between them was companionable, the tension of their first meeting replaced by a quiet understanding. "Thank you for giving me this chance," Jeffrey said softly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." Isabella looked at him, her expression warm but tinged with sadness. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Luca. He deserves to know his father." Jeffrey nodded, the truth of her words sinking in. He had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. As the sun set over Florence, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Jeffrey watched Luca laugh and draw, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he wanted to be a part of this boy's life, no matter what it took. Jeffrey lingered in the doorway of Isabella's apartment, watching Luca as he sprawled on the living room floor, engrossed in assembling a puzzle. The boy's brow furrowed in concentration, his small hands carefully fitting the pieces together. It was such a simple scene, yet it filled Jeffrey with a quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. For all his success, this, being present, sharing these moments, felt like his most significant accomplishment. But his contentment was tempered by an undercurrent of unease. Every time he checked his phone, he saw Emma's messages, polite, distant, and increasingly rare. Each one felt like a reminder of how far apart they'd grown, both physically and emotionally. He drafted countless replies, trying to strike the right balance between honesty and reassurance, but none of them felt right. So, more often than not, he left her messages unanswered, adding another layer to the silence between them. Back home, Emma stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over Jeffrey's name. She'd sent him a message earlier that day, a simple, "How are things going?" and his lack of response was painfully familiar. She locked her phone with a sigh and set it aside, feeling the now familiar ache of being ignored. Across the table, Daniel watched her with quiet concern. They were seated in her kitchen, sharing a bottle of wine as they often did during Jeffrey's long absences. Daniel had been her closest friend for years, a steady presence when Jeffrey wasn't. Lately, she found herself leaning on him more and more, finding solace in his easy conversation and genuine care. "He hasn't answered, has he?" Daniel asked gently, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Emma shook her head, forcing a small smile. "No. He's busy, I'm sure. There's a lot going on." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Emma, it's okay to admit this is hard. You don't have to pretend everything's fine." Her smile faltered, and for a moment the mask she wore so well slipped. "It's just, I don't even know what we are anymore. He's there, halfway across the world, dealing with this whole other life, and I'm here, waiting for scraps of his attention." Daniel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You deserve more than scraps." Emma looked at him, her eyes glistening. His words were a lifeline, a reminder of something she hadn't dared to acknowledge. She squeezed his hand, grateful for his unwavering support. In Florence, Jeffrey was grappling with his own doubts. He watched Luca animatedly explain the puzzle's progress, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He couldn't shake the fear that he wasn't cut out for this, that he'd already failed as a father before he'd even started. And then there was Emma. Their last conversation had been tense, her voice tinged with frustration and hurt. He didn't blame her. He'd made this decision to come here without fully considering what it would mean for their already fragile marriage. "Jeffrey?" Isabella's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was standing in the doorway to the kitchen, a soft smile on her face. "Dinner's ready." Jeffrey nodded and joined her, his heart heavy despite the warmth of the moment. They sat around the table, the three of them, sharing stories and laughter. For a while, his doubts faded, replaced by the simple joy of being part of something he never imagined for himself. But the peace was short-lived. Late that night, as Luca slept, Isabella knocked softly on Jeffrey's door. "Jeffrey, something's wrong. Luca's fever won't break." Panic gripped him as he followed her to Luca's room. The boy was flushed and restless, his small body radiating heat. Isabella was calm but clearly worried, her hands trembling as she pressed a cool cloth to Luca's forehead. "We need to take him to the hospital," Jeffrey said, his voice steadier than he felt. The hours that followed were a blur of sterile hallways and concerned whispers. Jeffrey stayed by Luca's side, his heart aching with every labored breath the boy took. Isabella sat nearby, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. For the first time, Jeffrey truly felt the weight of what it meant to be a parent, the helplessness, the fear, and the fierce determination to protect at all costs. Eventually, the doctor reassured them that Luca's condition was under control, a viral infection, nothing more. Relief washed over Jeffrey like a tidal wave, leaving him exhausted but deeply grateful. He stayed with Luca through the night, holding his hand and watching over him as he slept. In those quiet hours, Jeffrey felt a shift within himself. This boy, with his bright smile and boundless energy, was his son. It was no longer a question of responsibility or duty, it was a matter of love. Whatever it took, Jeffrey knew he would be there for Luca. Back in New York, Emma was feeling a shift of her own. Her evenings with Daniel had become a comfort she looked forward to, a reprieve from the loneliness and uncertainty that plagued her marriage. That night, as they shared another bottle of wine, the conversation turned more personal. "You've been there for me so much lately," Emma said softly, her gaze lingering on Daniel. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Daniel smiled, his eyes warm. "You're stronger than you think, Emma. But I'm glad I can be here for you." Their eyes met, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Emma hesitated, torn between loyalty to her fractured marriage and the undeniable connection she felt with Daniel. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, she leaned in. The kiss was brief but electric, a moment that felt both inevitable and impossible. Emma pulled back, her heart racing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head. "Don't be. But we need to figure out what this means." Emma nodded, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know what it meant, or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, wanted. Meanwhile, Jeffrey returned to Isabella's apartment the next morning with Luca, who was still tired but on the mend. Isabella met them at the door, her relief evident as she embraced her son. "Thank you," she said to Jeffrey, her voice thick with emotion. "For being there." Jeffrey nodded, his hand resting briefly on Luca's shoulder. "I wouldn't have been anywhere else." As he watched Luca settle onto the couch with a blanket, Jeffrey felt a newfound sense of clarity. His doubts hadn't vanished, but they were outweighed by something stronger, the determination to be the father Luca deserved. Back in New York, Emma sat alone in her living room, her mind replaying the events of the night before. The lines she'd once drawn felt blurred, her path forward uncertain. Yet as she stared at her phone, waiting for a message from Jeffrey that didn't come, she wondered if the distance between them had become more than just physical. Perhaps it was something they couldn't bridge at all. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the late-night city skyline outside her window. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a leaden blanket. She told herself it was a mistake, just one moment of weakness. But it hadn't ended there. She and Daniel had continued to meet, their connection deepening with every passing day. It was more than physical. It was a reprieve from the loneliness that had defined her marriage for years. Yet, with each stolen moment, the guilt clawed at her. She couldn't erase the memory of Luca's photo, the boy who had so clearly changed Jeffrey's life. Despite her resentment toward Jeffrey for the distance between them, she couldn't ignore the flickers of admiration for how he was stepping up. And that admiration only sharpened the sting of her own betrayal. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Daniel. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." She stared at it for a long moment before typing back a simple reply. "I need some space." Emma set the phone down, her mind racing. She couldn't keep living this double life. If there was any hope of salvaging her marriage, or even just finding clarity, she had to face Jeffrey. Across the Atlantic, Jeffrey was discovering a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. His days in Florence were filled with a rhythm that felt natural, mornings spent helping Luca with his schoolwork, afternoons exploring the city together, and evenings sharing quiet meals with Isabella. Their shared history began to weave itself into the present in unexpected ways. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Isabella opened up about the years she'd spent raising Luca alone. "I didn't want him to grow up resenting you," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "So I told him you didn't know. That you weren't ready for this life when we met." Jeffrey looked at her, guilt and gratitude swirling inside him. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone." Isabella turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. We managed. But it's better now that you're here. He needs you, Jeffrey. And maybe you need him too. Her words lingered with him long after she'd gone to bed. As much as he tried to focus on the present, memories of their time together resurfaced. Her laughter, the way she'd lit up when talking about her art, the effortless connection they'd shared. It had been years, but those feelings hadn't faded entirely. And now, watching her with Luca, Jeffrey felt something he hadn't expected, the stirrings of love. It terrified him. His marriage to Emma was fractured but still alive, and he wasn't ready to admit how much of it was slipping away. But with every passing day, the warmth of Florence, the bond with Luca, and Isabella's quiet strength made it harder to ignore the growing distance between him and the life he'd left behind in New York. One afternoon, as they walked through a park, Luca darted ahead to chase pigeons, leaving Jeffrey and Isabella behind. "He's happier here," Isabella said, her voice breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I'm happy to be here," Jeffrey replied. He hesitated before adding, "I just wish I could say the same for Emma and me." Isabella glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "You haven't told me much about her." Jeffrey sighed. "There isn't much to say that doesn't sound complicated. We've been distant for years. My career, her sacrifices. We've grown apart. And now, with everything happening here, it feels like we're on opposite sides of the world, even when we're in the same room." Isabella didn't respond right away, her gaze following Luca as he laughed and ran ahead. Finally, she said, "Maybe it's time to figure out what you really want, Jeffrey. For yourself, for her, and for Luca." Her words struck a chord Jeffrey couldn't ignore. He wasn't sure what he wanted anymore, but he knew he couldn't keep living in limbo. Back in New York, Emma was packing a suitcase. The decision to visit Jeffrey hadn't come easily, but the guilt, the distance, and the unresolved feelings between them had become unbearable. She needed to see him, to confront everything that had been left unsaid. Daniel had been supportive when she told him. "If this is what you need to do, I understand," he'd said, though his voice carried a hint of sadness. As the plane touched down in Florence, Emma felt a strange mix of dread and determination. She checked into a small hotel, deciding to give herself a night to adjust before contacting Jeffrey. The city was beautiful, its timeless charm a stark contrast to the turmoil she carried inside her. The next morning, she texted Jeffrey. "I'm in Florence. Can we talk?" The reply came quickly. "Of course. Come by Isabella's place. I'll text you the address." Emma stared at the message, her stomach churning. Seeing him with Isabella and Luca felt like stepping into a life she didn't belong in, but she had no choice. She needed answers even if they weren't the ones she wanted. When Emma arrived at Isabella's apartment, Jeffrey greeted her at the door, his expression a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Emma," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, Luca was busy at the dining table, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Hi! You must be Emma," he said with the unfiltered enthusiasm of a child. "I'm Luca." Emma managed a smile, though her heart ached at the sight of him. "Hi, Luca. It's nice to meet you." Isabella appeared from the kitchen, her demeanor calm but guarded. "Jeffrey, I'll take Luca out for a bit," she said, giving Emma a polite nod. "It's nice to meet you." As the door closed behind them, Emma turned to Jeffrey, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "This feels surreal." "I know," Jeffrey said, gesturing for her to sit. "Thank you for coming." Emma sat down, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot, Jeffrey. About us, about everything. And I need to tell you something." Jeffrey's heart sank at her tone. "What is it?" "I've been seeing someone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel. It wasn't planned, and I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Jeffrey stared at her, the initial shock giving way to a strange sense of understanding. "I see," he said finally, his voice calm but tinged with sadness. "I don't know what this means for us," Emma continued, her eyes glistening. "But I needed to be honest. And I needed to see you, To figure out where we go from here. Jeffrey nodded, his mind racing. He thought of Luca, of Isabella, of the life he'd begun to build here. And for the first time, he realized that the ties binding him to Emma had frayed beyond repair. We both deserve to find happiness, he said quietly. Even if it's not together. Emma's tears spilled over, but she nodded. Maybe you're right. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. It wasn't the ending either of them had envisioned, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something they both needed. The hours after Emma's confession passed in a blur. Jeffrey sat on the couch, staring blankly out of the window at the Florentine skyline, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't seem to organize. Emma had retreated to the guest room, and the house was quiet save for the occasional creak of old floorboards. He hadn't been angry when she told him about Daniel, but the hurt was there, deep and unspoken. Yet, in that hurt, there was also clarity. Their marriage, already weakened by years of neglect and miscommunication, had reached a point where either of them could deny the truth anymore. They were better apart than they were together. The next morning, the household came alive again. Luca's laughter echoed down the hall as he talked with Isabella in the kitchen, the two of them bustling around as they prepared breakfast. Emma emerged slowly, her face pale and drawn, but she managed a faint smile as she stepped into the warm and lively space. "Good morning," Isabella greeted her with a kind smile, handing her a cup of coffee. "Morning," Emma replied, taking the cup with a grateful nod. She couldn't help but notice how natural this felt, as though Isabella and Jeffrey had already carved out a life that felt full and grounded, even without her presence. Luca ran up to her, his eyes bright. "Are you staying for breakfast? Mom makes the best pancakes." Emma's heart ached at the boy's innocence. "I'd love to, Luca." The meal was simple but warm, filled with Luca's cheerful chatter and Isabella's gentle laughter. Jeffrey, sitting beside Luca, seemed more at ease than Emma had seen him in years. He smiled often, his hand ruffling Luca's hair affectionately as the boy recounted his latest chess victory. Emma watched quietly, struck by how seamlessly Jeffrey fit into this world. She realized, with a pang of bittersweet clarity, that he was happier here. This life, with Luca, with Isabella, was giving him something she hadn't seen in him for a long time: peace. After breakfast, Jeffrey and Emma took a walk through the city. The streets were lively, full of tourists and locals, but the space between them felt intimate, as if the world had faded into the background. They stopped at a quiet piazza, sitting on a bench beneath the shade of an olive tree. Emma broke the silence first. "It's beautiful here." "It is," Jeffrey agreed, his gaze distant. "I forgot how much I love this city." She hesitated before speaking again. "You seem different here. Happier." Jeffrey glanced at her, the weight of her words settling between them. "I think I am." Emma nodded, her expression softening. "I meant what I said last night, Jeffrey. I never wanted to hurt you. But I think we've been hurting each other for years without realizing it." He sighed, leaning back against the bench. "We have. And I've been thinking a lot about that. About us." "Me too," she admitted. Her voice trembled as she continued. "Maybe we've been holding on because we're afraid of what letting go means." Jeffrey turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. "Maybe letting go is what we need. Not because we don't care about each other, but because we've both changed. And it's okay to admit that." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes but forced a small smile. "It is okay, isn't it? To want something different, even if it's scary." "It is," Jeffrey said softly. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll always care about you, Emma. You've been such a big part of my life. But I think we both deserve to be happy in a way we haven't been for a long time." Emma nodded, her tears slipping free despite her efforts. "I want that for you too." They sat in silence for a while, their hands still intertwined, letting the moment settle over them. It wasn't a goodbye filled with anger or resentment, but one of understanding and mutual respect. They had loved each other once, and in a way, they always would. But it was time to let each other go. The next day, Emma packed her things. Luca hugged her tightly before she left, his small arms wrapping around her waist. "Will you come back to visit?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Emma knelt to his level, her voice soft. "I don't know, Luca. But you're an incredible boy, and I know you're going to have a wonderful life." She stood and turned to Isabella, who offered her a warm but knowing smile. "Thank you," Emma said quietly, her voice sincere. "For being so kind." Isabella nodded. "Safe travels, Emma." At the airport, Jeffrey hugged Emma tightly before she walked through security. Neither of them said much, but the understanding between them didn't need words. They parted with a shared sense of closure, the first step toward the lives they both needed to build. Back in New York, Emma ended her relationship with Daniel. It wasn't because she didn't care for him, she did, but she realized she couldn't move forward until she took the time to heal and rediscover herself. She needed to learn what happiness meant for her, independent of anyone else. Meanwhile, in Florence, Jeffrey returned to Isabella's apartment, the weight of the past few days finally lifting. That evening, he sat with Luca, helping him strategize for their next chess match. Isabella watched from the doorway, a quiet smile playing on her lips. Later, as they cleaned up the kitchen together, Isabella turned to him. "How are you feeling?" Jeffrey considered her question for a moment. "Lighter," he admitted. "It's strange, but I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." Isabella's smile widened, her eyes warm. "I'm glad." As the evening wore on, the three of them settled into a rhythm that felt natural and right. For the first time in years, Jeffrey wasn't chasing deadlines or fighting to hold something together. He was simply present, and it was enough. Jeffrey watched as the warm Italian sunlight spilled across the kitchen, illuminating Isabella as she worked on a canvas set up near the window. Her focus was unbroken, her brush moving with a grace that was as mesmerizing now as it had been 7 years ago. Luca sat at the table beside him, carefully sketching a chessboard in his notebook, his tongue peeking out in concentration. For the first time in years, Jeffrey felt settled. The chaos of his former life, the relentless pace of his work, the emotional distance in his marriage, seemed like a distant memory. Here, in Florence, life was slower, more intentional. And the warmth of this small family, his family, wrapped around him like a balm. Later that evening, after Luca had gone to bed, Jeffrey found himself sitting on the balcony with Isabella. The night was quiet except for the occasional distant hum of voices and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. He turned to Isabella, who was sipping a glass of wine, her expression serene. "You've built a beautiful life here," Jeffrey said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I can see why you stayed." Isabella looked at him, her smile tinged with both warmth and a hint of sadness. "It wasn't always easy. But Luca gave me a purpose, and this city has a way of healing wounds, even the deep ones." Jeffrey nodded, his gaze drifting out to the view of Florence. "I didn't know what I was walking into when I got that first call. I was terrified, to be honest. But now, I can't imagine not being here." Isabella set her glass down and turned to face him fully. "I never blamed you, Jeffrey. For not knowing. For moving on. We were in different places back then, and I never wanted to burden you with something you weren't ready for." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "But I'm ready now. And not just for Luca. For us if you'll have me." Her expression shifted, the vulnerability in her eyes mirrored in his. "I never stopped caring for you, Jeffrey. But are you sure? This isn't just about Luca?" Jeffrey reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "It's not just about Luca. It's about everything. The life you've built. The way you've raised him. The way I feel when I'm here with you. I've spent so long running towards success, thinking it would make me whole. But this, being here with you and Luca, this is what I've been missing." Isabella's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she smiled. "Then let's take it one day at a time." They sat there in the quiet, their hands intertwined, the future stretching before them in a way that felt both uncertain and full of promise. In New York, Emma stood in the middle of an art studio, a paintbrush in her hand and a blank canvas in front of her. It had been years since she'd picked up a brush, but something about the act felt familiar, like reconnecting with an old friend. The bright light of the studio illuminated her workspace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a spark of excitement. Since returning from Florence, Emma had thrown herself into rediscovering who she was outside of her marriage. She had taken a leave of absence from her corporate job and enrolled in art classes, rekindling the passion she had abandoned years ago. Slowly but surely, she was piecing herself back together, not as someone's wife or confidant, but as Emma. The city felt different now, less overwhelming and more like an opportunity. She explored parts of it she'd never taken the time to notice, met new people, and reconnected with old friends. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking outward for validation. She was finding it within herself. One evening, she received a package from Jeffrey. Inside was a letter and a small, intricately carved wooden chess piece, a rook, which she instantly recognized as one of Luca's creations. The letter was short but heartfelt. Dear Emma, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to thank you for everything. For the years we spent together, for the understanding you showed me even when things were difficult, and for the grace you've carried through all of this. Luca made this for you. He said it's to remind you that you're always part of this story, even if our paths have changed. Isabella and I are doing well, and Luca is thriving. I hope you are too. From what you've told me about your new chapter, I know you'll find happiness. You deserve it. Take care of yourself, Emma. Jeffrey. Emma held the chess piece in her hand, her thumb running over its smooth edges. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep sense of closure. She set the piece on her desk, a small but meaningful reminder of the life she had shared with Jeffrey and the life she was building now. Back in Florence, Jeffrey sat with Isabella on the same balcony where they had shared so many conversations. Luca was asleep inside, his laughter from earlier in the evening still echoing in Jeffrey's mind. Emma wrote back, Jeffrey said, handing Isabella a letter. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the page. Dear Jeffrey, thank you for your letter and for Luca's thoughtful gift. It's beautiful, and I'll treasure it. I'm so glad to hear you're doing well. I've started painting again. It feels strange and wonderful to rediscover something I loved so much. Life in New York is different now, quieter but fulfilling in ways I didn't expect. I'm glad we found a way to part with kindness. I'll always be grateful for what we shared, and I'll always wish the best for you and Luca, and Isabella. Take care, Jeffrey. Emma. Isabella looked up at him, her expression soft. She's finding her way. She is, Jeffrey agreed, a quiet smile on his face. And so are we. As the night deepened, Jeffrey leaned back, his hand resting over Isabella's. The journey that had brought them here had been anything but simple, but it had led to a place of peace. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like a promise. In New York, Emma stepped back from her easel, wiping her hands on a cloth as she admired her latest painting. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a reflection of the woman she was becoming. A sense of lightness filled her, and for the first time in years, she felt truly free. In Florence, Jeffrey stood on the balcony with Isabella, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Inside, Luca's quiet breathing filled the apartment, a reminder of the family they were building together. Jeffrey wrapped his arm around Isabella, pulling her close. Two lives, once intertwined, had found their way forward on separate paths. And in their own ways, both Jeffrey and Emma were happier than they had ever been. Emma's mornings had taken on a rhythm she hadn't experienced in years, a rhythm that felt entirely her own. The sound of birds outside her window served as her alarm clock, not the incessant buzzing of her phone. She no longer hurried through her mornings, rushing from one task to the next. Instead, she made time for herself, a leisurely cup of coffee, a walk through the neighborhood, and a moment to sit by her window and let her thoughts wander. Her apartment, once an afterthought in the whirlwind of her former life, had transformed into a sanctuary. The walls were adorned with her paintings, some finished, some half-formed, all reflections of the woman she was rediscovering. A corner of the living room had become her dedicated art space, cluttered with brushes, palettes, and canvases. It was chaotic, but it was hers, and it brought her an inexplicable sense of joy. The art classes she'd enrolled in had started as a tentative step, but they quickly became a cornerstone of her new life. The studio was filled with an eclectic mix of people, young students, retirees, and hobbyists, each bringing their unique perspective and energy. Emma found herself immersed in the camaraderie, her confidence growing with every class. One afternoon, as she worked on a still life painting, her instructor, Elena, paused behind her. "You have a great eye for detail," Elena said, gesturing toward the subtle shadows Emma had added to the fruit bowl on her canvas. "Have you thought about showcasing your work?" Emma blinked, startled by the suggestion. "Showcase? No, I haven't. This is just for me." Elena smiled knowingly. "It starts that way for many of us. But your work has something to say, Emma. Don't be afraid to share it." The idea lingered in her mind long after class ended. Could she? The thought of putting her work out into the world was both exhilarating and terrifying. She wasn't the same woman who had hidden behind polished perfection, afraid of failure or judgment. But the fear was still there, lurking at the edges. Her days weren't entirely consumed by art. She had also started volunteering at a local community center, teaching children simple painting techniques. The kids' unfiltered enthusiasm and creativity reminded her why she'd fallen in love with art in the first place. They didn't care about technique or tradition, they just wanted to create. Watching them paint with wild abandon, Emma often found herself smiling, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Outside of her creative pursuits, Emma had begun to nurture friendships she neglected during her marriage. She met her old college friend, Sophie, for weekly brunches, their conversations flowing easily as they caught up on years of missed moments. Sophie had noticed the change in Emma immediately. "You're glowing," Sophie remarked one morning over avocado toast. "It's like you've come alive again." Emma laughed, a sound she realized had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I think I have. For so long, I was living a life that didn't feel like mine. Now I'm finally figuring out who I am." Sophie raised her mimosa in a toast. "Here's to Emma 2.0. Emma clinked her glass with a grin, feeling a spark of pride. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself embracing challenges she would have once avoided. She signed up for a public art exhibition, submitting one of her landscapes, a vibrant depiction of the park she often visited. Standing in the gallery on opening night, surrounded by strangers admiring her work, she felt a swell of accomplishment. This was her moment, unshared and unapologetically her own. One evening, as she sat at her desk writing in her journal, she thought about Jeffrey. Their lives had diverged so completely, yet she felt no bitterness. Instead, she felt a quiet gratitude for the clarity their parting had given her. She picked up her phone and typed out a message. "Hi, Jeffrey. I just wanted to thank you for everything. Letting go of us was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's also been the most freeing. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're as happy as I am. Take care." She sent the message before she could second-guess herself. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Hi, Emma. Thank you for saying that. I'm happy you've found peace, you deserve it. Lucas still talks about you, by the way. He thinks you're the coolest person ever for traveling all the way to Florence to meet him. Take care of yourself." Emma smiled, tears pricking at her eyes. It felt good to know she'd left a positive mark, even in a chapter that had ended. The seasons shifted, and with them, so did Emma. Her days became a celebration of small joys, trying new recipes, experimenting with bold colors in her paintings, dancing around her apartment to music that made her feel alive. She wasn't just existing anymore, she was living. One afternoon, as she walked through the park, she stopped to sit on a bench beneath a canopy of trees. Children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. She pulled out her sketchpad and began to draw, capturing the scene with quick, confident strokes. As she worked, a little girl approached her, peering curiously at the page. "Are you an artist?" the girl asked, her wide eyes full of wonder. Emma smiled, pausing her pencil. "I suppose I am." The words felt right, natural. For the first time, she realized she believed them. Emma the artist. The woman rediscovering herself. The woman finally, gloriously, whole. As Emma walked through the vibrant streets of her newfound life, and Jeffrey embraced the warmth of family in Florence, one thing became clear: sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting go. Both Jeffrey and Emma found their own paths, discovering joy and purpose not in what they had lost, but in what they had gained, a sense of clarity, independence, and the courage to rebuild. Their journey reminds us that life is rarely a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and filled with twists we don't always expect. But through self-discovery and resilience, we can find beauty in the chapters we never saw coming. What do you think of Jeffrey and Emma's story? Could you imagine making the kind of choices they did? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about life, love, and the moments that define us. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.